Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Gay Stevenson, and I'm from the Canadian Urban Institute. Today, I'm here with my colleague, Gabriela Masfare, and we are working in partnership on this program with the Community Foundations of Canada, who have funded incredible placemaking projects Canada-wide. And we're so excited to keep offering these mob sessions, as we affectionately call them, to support your ongoing work in communities. This session will be led by another great partner of ours, and we have some special guests joining in. Gabriela will tell you a bit more about that in a moment, and you see Shady on the screen. He is our fabulous partner who will be leading this session. I'm going to keep encouraging you to put your names into the chat. It's always a joy to see where you're joining us from. And in these Zoom webinars, you can see us, but we can't see you, unfortunately. To select the language that you'd like to listen in, there's a globe at the bottom of the screen. You can choose to listen in French or English. And we'll be recording this session to share it with you at the end, and you can share it with whoever you like. We hope you'll participate in the chat. We look forward to your questions and sharing resources and chatting with each other, one another, and sharing insights and questions as well. I'm joining today from Vancouver, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations, whose relationship with the land continues to this day. Placemaking is essential to the reconciliation agenda that we are all trying to navigate our way into, to understand how we can honor and respect and affirm the ancestral traditions with First Nations and Indigenous communities. Here we are, back today in the conversation about placemaking and all the things that make communities great. In particular, today, we look forward to hearing from our partner, Shady Hafez from the National Association of Friendship Centers, and our special guests about how non-Indigenous organizations can reach out and build meaningful, respectful relationships with Indigenous organizations. Over to you, Gabriela.
Thank you so much, Gay. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to be with all of you today and to learn from each other's experiences. So together with Shady today, we are really grateful to be joined by the leaders and the teams of two projects that have been funded by the Healthy Communities Initiatives, who will also be sharing their reflections, experiences, and learnings. So on the one hand, we have Sage Paul, who is the Executive and Artistic Director of the Indigenous Fashion Arts, which is the organization that leads the Indigenous Fashion Week in Toronto. The Indigenous Fashion Week in Toronto is a gathering that engages over 100 artists and Indigenous designers from across the country with the purpose to celebrate Indigenous expression, art, and knowledge. Sage will let us know a bit more later on in the session. And then on the other hand, we're also really happy to have on the call today a group of members from the Tuktoyaktuk Community Corporation. Tuktoyaktuk is a community of just under 1,000 people, if I'm not wrong, located on the shores of the Arctic Ocean, basically on the tip of the Northwest Territories. Throughout the Healthy Communities Initiative, they have been able to fund the expansion of their local makerspace, a safe indoor space that they're using for residents to explore creative projects, learn about new technologies, and to also produce and sell some of their small items online. So today on the call, we have with us Nelly Cournoyea, the Tuktoyaktuk Community Corporation Vice Chair. We have Candice Cockney, who is a project manager in the Tuktoyaktuk Community Corporation. And also we have John Thomas Noxana, who is a manager and a technician for the Makerspace. And hopefully we might be able to have also one of the local artists joining, but they will let us know in a couple of minutes once the conversation starts. So thank you so much for all of you to take the time today to share about your knowledge and experiences. And I think I pass it back to you, Gay.
It's great seeing everybody waving. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Shady, but I just wanted to let you know that Gabriella and I will be back in the last 15 minutes of this session to share any questions that you have put into the chat to facilitate a session with our guests and Shady. We're very excited to begin these discussions. There are lots of questions, and so we'd like to extend this session to 90 minutes for those of you that are able to stay on with us today. And so if you need to leave at any point, don't worry, that's completely fine. We will share the recorded session with everyone over email afterwards. So without further ado, this is your third mobilization session with us, Shady. Welcome, take it away.
Thank you, Gay. Thank you, Gabriella, for those great introductions. Yeah, this is the third session, and I think this is probably the biggest one. I have to say, I get nervous when I see the number in the corner. The people keep going up and up and up, so it gets a little bit nerve-wracking. But can we pop up these slides? Oh, there we go. Okay, so before beginning, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Shady Hafez. I am Algonquin Anishinaabe and Syrian, and I'm a member of Kitigan-Zibi Anishinaabe, which is an Algonquin community located just an hour and a half north of Ottawa. I'm coming to you from my ancestral territory here in Ottawa, which is unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. My ancestors lived along the Ottawa River prior to the city being built and Parliament Hill being built along the shores of the river here. I'm also the Special Projects Advisor to the National Association of Friendship Centers. And as part of that work, I do a lot of different things and wear many different hats for the organization, and I'll share a little bit about who we are in a second, but that's who I am. So hello, everyone, and I'm really happy to be here today and share with you a little bit. I apologize, I keep getting these messages popping up from my director, who probably doesn't realize I'm in this webinar right now. So if we can go to the next slide. So yeah, as mentioned just now, I am the Special Projects Advisor to the National Association of Friendship Centers, and I put this little thing up because it's kind of a great year for us. We're celebrating our 50th year. So the National Association of Friendship Centers was established in 1972 to represent nationally the growing number of friendship centers emerging across Canada. We currently represent roughly 125 active friendship centers and 7 provincial territorial associations. Friendship centers themselves have been in existence since probably around the 50s, late 40s, early 50s, and really began as the urban Indigenous population really began to grow in cities, and there was a need for services and programs and access to culture and Indigenous spaces within cities, specifically cities like Vancouver and Toronto. The movement itself is Canada's most significant national network of self-determined Indigenous-owned civil society community hubs, and we offer programs, services, and supports to Indigenous people that live in urban, rural, and remote settings. Specifically for Indigenous people living off reserve, Métis living outside the Métis homelands, and Inuit living in the south. Our collective work reaches millions of points of contact every year and hundreds of thousands of people every single day from coast to coast to coast. So I'll just move over to the next slide. Yeah, so our mission and our vision as the NAFC is to support friendship centers and PTAs in achieving their diverse missions and visions within their urban Indigenous communities, ascending to a future that remembers the past and is rooted in our cultures to improve the well-being of Indigenous people living in urban environments. So, I mean, I'm kind of a testament. A lot of us at the NAFC are a testament. So my executive director, Jocelyn Formsma, myself, our president, we're all people who came up through Friendship Centers as youth, involved in different initiatives at the Friendship Center level, whether that was youth councils or programs, all these different things. And so I can really testify that Friendship Centers were an integral space for myself and many other people who were living and growing up in cities to stay connected with community, to stay connected with our cultures and our identities, but also to really grow and to foster ourselves in a really good way. It gave us access to things that I think I might not have had access to, and spaces that I might not have had access to when it comes to, you know, travel opportunities, participation in different conferences and learning different things. So Friendship Centers are a really great space. And if you live in a city in Canada, there's, I would almost say 100% chance that there's a Friendship Center in your city. Even if you live in a small town that has a significant Indigenous population or an Indigenous community nearby, there's probably a Friendship Center there. And I'll share a little bit about that afterwards. So today we're talking about how non-Indigenous organizations can build meaningful relationships with Indigenous organizations. And I'm only going to really be able to speak from the work I've done and the perspective that I have. I think the other panelists afterwards will probably have different experiences and different thoughts on this topic. It really varies. And I think it's important to also mention that building a relationship with a community organization or an Indigenous organization, while there might be some overlap and different types of, you know, there might be some overlap in the ways that you would build that relationship with representatives of a nation. It isn't necessarily the same thing. And so some organizations are mandated to speak on behalf of nations, like tribal council organizations and governance representative organizations, whereas some aren't necessarily mandated to speak on behalf of entire nations. So I think it's important to make that distinction. So I'm speaking on behalf of the NAFC. We represent Friendship Centers across the country. And so I'm only going to be really speaking from that perspective. So we'll move to the next slide, please. So my experiences, unfortunately, have not been, I've probably had more negative experiences than positive experiences when it comes to building relationships with non-Indigenous organizations. And we do a lot of work with organizations right across the country. And I don't have the kind of, you know, the manual or guidebook or step-by-step process of how you should do it and what works and what doesn't work. I'm going to try my best to tell you, you know, from our experiences, what we like and what we don't like. And then I'll probably, just because of my experiences and having had a lot of negative experiences, I'll share a little bit more about that, and then I'll get into the positive side of things, and, you know, hopefully won't dwell too much on the negative. But I think the first question that most non-Indigenous organizations should really ask themselves is, what is your organization's current comprehension of and engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues? Is to do an evaluation internally and to really see, you know, do the people that work with and represent your organization, if you represent a network of different organizations, what's the comprehension of and engagement within your organization of the issues that we as Indigenous people face? What's the level of education that exists within the organization about, you know, maybe even just the basic fundamentals of understanding Indigenous peoples, Indigenous identities, Indigenous communities, and then, you know, the significant issues that are affecting Indigenous peoples today. And is the reason you're seeking to build a relationship to maybe fill a gap of education within your organization? And if that's the reason, I would suggest, you know, as a kind of step one, is to really look at different initiatives that you can take within your organization to begin the process of informing and educating your organization as a whole to really understand our issues, but not just our issues, because I think oftentimes I work with organizations that, I mean, don't even talk about issues, really don't even understand the makeup of Indigenous peoples in Canada, the very basics and the fundamentals of Indigenous identity. And so there are a number of different, services and programs out there, and I can kind of plug in the Friendship Center program right now. The Under One Sky Friendship Center offers an education program for non-Indigenous organizations, government agencies, education, like schools and high schools, to come in and basically do these kind of programs to help build the capacity within non-Indigenous organizations to understand Indigenous issues. So I always suggest that this kind of be a starting point for non-Indigenous organizations. And then I think you would ask, why do you want to build a relationship with an Indigenous organization? And a lot of times, I think I've been brought into spaces, brought into tables, brought into different committees or different things from different organizations, because there's a feeling that there needs to be an Indigenous representation at that table, which is great. I don't, disagree with all of that. And I think we definitely need to ensure that there's representation in different spaces and in all spaces. But we need to be careful to, the line between representation and tokenization is really important, and we need to distinguish between those two things and really ask ourselves, well, not ourselves because we're an Indigenous organization, but for non-Indigenous organizations to ask, what do you hope to seek from the relationship? Why do you want to partner with an Indigenous organization? Is there a specific community that you're looking to build a relationship with? Is there a specific type of capacity or expertise that you as a non-Indigenous organization don't have and would like to gain? So these are different, questions that I think need to be answered more clearly before approaching an Indigenous organization. Because then, as I'll go into some of the next steps, you can answer those questions a little bit better. But I would really prioritize these two questions before even beginning to reach out and have these conversations. We can go on to the next slide. So I'll go through some of the kind of common issues and assumptions. Sorry, I'm just seeing questions pop up. So yeah, these are good. Put up questions in the chat group, and at the end, hopefully we can speak to some of them. So some of the common issues and assumptions that take place, and one on our end that I can speak to is definitely capacity. As a national Indigenous organization, we get asked to partner on a lot of things. Too many things, to be completely honest. And although we'd love to participate in everything and anything, it's a challenge when we're still a growing organization. I think when I first came on here 2 years ago, we had 10, maybe not even employees, and now we're almost at 30 some employees. So we're growing, but we're growing to address needs in our communities and to respond to needs in our communities and to do the work within our communities. And so it's often hard for our organizations to take employees' time, our staff members' time, and dedicate it to different partnerships and different projects that might exist out there. And so I think this is something, a consideration that should be had by non-Indigenous organizations when approaching Indigenous organizations and Indigenous communities. I also did, I used to work in my community, Kiliganzibi, as the mental health team coordinator for a few years. And we would also, receive a lot of requests. And oftentimes these were requests that the questions prior that I showed on the slide before were not answered by the organization that was approaching us. And so it often seemed like they wanted to bring us on to help them answer those questions. And that takes up a lot of time from our community organizations, time that we want to be spending working with our communities and helping our communities. So that's something that I think to consider, to think about when approaching Indigenous organizations is the capacity that the organization has, the size of the organization, the scope of the organization, what it is that they do, and then how much time the partnership or the project that you're seeking to build that relationship on will take from the work that that organization is doing. And will the partnership actually support the work that they're doing. So some things to consider. Another is funding. So Indigenous organizations right across the board, I mean, but I'll speak specifically the friendship centers are underfunded in comparison to the community, the size of the community that we serve. So the urban Indigenous population is the largest Indigenous population in Canada, and we don't receive enough funds to really adequately serve that population. And so given the limited amount of funds, this then taps back into the capacity issue of if we're being asked to sit on different tables, partnerships, build relationships, support non-Indigenous organizations, we're really stretching our dollars thin. We do want to do that work, we do want to help, but if a non-Indigenous organization has the ability to compensate an Indigenous organization for the time and the capacity that it's taking away from that organization to support or build a relationship in whatever project they're working on, that's always, I think, welcome, to help compensate for that time that's taken away from that organization. And it's definitely something to think about. We talk about this often across the country. We know the Indigenous communities, education systems, organizations are chronically underfunded. And so we need to be considerate of that when approaching Indigenous organizations to build relationships and to seek support for different initiatives and projects. One assumption is a common assumption, I think, is also representation. Okay, I have 5 minutes left for the presentation. Good to know. I've been rambling. So we don't all represent each other. I can't speak for the experiences of, let's say the Inuit. I can't speak for those experiences and for what those needs might be in the north. I can't speak for a treaty council or a community, out in Alberta somewhere. Or what I'm trying to say is that each organization has its mandate and is mandated to do what it's supposed to do. And so sometimes we're asked to sit and build relationships to provide the Indigenous perspective, which, we can try, but we can't speak for everything and we can't speak on behalf of everything. So I think it's important that if you're seeking to build a relationship, again, it's asking those first questions, and then you'll be able to understand what type of representation are you looking for, and what voices are you looking for at the table. And if you're just looking for a broad range of perspectives, I suggest including many different organizations in your relationship building and not just one. We've often been asked to sit at tables and we have to speak. We've been asked to speak for everybody. And I always say, I don't want to speak for everybody. Please bring in more organizations that can represent those voices and those perspectives. And lastly, another issue is objectives. And this goes back to the first slides about those questions. I think we are often asked to sit to build partnerships and build relationships within non-Indigenous organizations without any clear goals or objectives from those relationships. And so it's much easier for us to determine whether or not we want to spend our time building a relationship within a non-Indigenous organization if we know what the objectives of that relationship are. If we know why that non-Indigenous organization wants to build a partnership with us or a relationship with us, then we can decide if we want to dedicate our time to that. But I've sat on tables where we're there for like a year or two and it's still unclear why we're there, other than maybe to check off a box that, yes, we spoke with Indigenous people, we have Indigenous representation at the table. So I think it's really important to have a clear outline of what those objectives are. So we'll move to the next slide, please. Oh, go back one more. Yeah. So kind of two things to also consider and to think about is the organization you seek to work with connected to the work you hope to do? And again, this goes back to representation and objectives. Not every Indigenous organization is going to be best suited to the work that you might hope to do, or vice versa. And so the relationship that is built and the connections that are built should be connected to the work that's being done. And again, this comes back to my own experiences of sitting at tables where I'm like, I don't know why we're here, because this isn't really related to the work that we do. And so it's really about making sure there's a clear connection to the on-the-ground work and outcomes for the communities that we're hoping to work with. And this kind of brings up this point that I want us to think about, which is building a relationship with an Indigenous organization is building a relationship with an Indigenous community. Our organizations work with and are composed of people from Indigenous communities, and we're accountable to our communities. And so when we take time from the work that we're doing with community to support non-Indigenous organizations or build those relationships, we have to justify that work and be accountable to our communities, and vice versa. And so I think it's important to have that consideration that our organizations are not just kind of floating around in a disconnect from community. We're very much connected to community, composed of community, and different organizations represent and work with different communities. And so just a consideration. So next slide. So just some best practices that I think to think about. Sorry, I keep moving my face around here because I'm in the way of my own slide. So communication, understanding, and education. I think clear and concise communication with Indigenous organizations. I often receive, emails that don't really make sense, and they're very just, to explain what it is when you're making that introduction that you would like to build with this Indigenous organization, but also make sure that as an organization, you've done the work prior to reaching out of understanding, informing yourselves, and developing that education of the issues that maybe that organization itself deals with. I've been approached by so many organizations that don't even know what we do, but they just want some kind of Indigenous representation at the table with them. And they have no clue what we do. When I tell them that we don't work on reserve, they're like, oh, we didn't know that. And it's like, nefc.ca, you can check out the website. It takes 5 minutes. So these are some things to think about. Also time, capacity, and support. Sometimes you might reach out to an Indigenous organization and they may not respond. Whether that's because there's no time to respond, there's a lack of capacity in the organization, or they don't want to participate in whatever the project is. I think respecting that time and respecting maybe the capacity issues is important. If you've tried once or twice and it's not working out, maybe save it for another day, or seek out maybe another organization. But we often, our inboxes are often full of these requests. And so I think just to be considerate of that, but also as well to make sure that if you're doing things like having meetings with these organizations, to make sure that it's not too much on the organization, especially if they're giving their time for free. So, we've been asked to sit on things where it's like, bi-weekly meetings, and that's a lot for an organization when we're trying to serve the communities that we serve. So to really think about the time that you're taking from these communities, and to make sure that it's respectful and appropriate for the work that's being done. The development of objectives, agreements, and protocol. So, develop an agreement between yourself and the Indigenous organization that outlines the roles and responsibilities of both organizations, the amount of times you may meet, what each organization may be giving to the other organization in terms of support, financial support, or in kind, whatever that might be, but have a clear set of goals and objectives that will come out of that relationship. And also respect protocols that exist. If you're reaching out to certain organizations within certain spaces and territories, learn about the protocols that might exist within those territories prior to reaching out. Sometimes too, even if you're reaching out to a community itself, and the community leadership is really to learn and understand what the different protocols of those communities are. And lastly, I think reciprocity, to be really considerate about I think a lot of times a lot of knowledge, information, understanding is taken from Indigenous organizations, and we don't really receive a whole lot in return. And I think it's to consider when you're building this relationship, what can you as a non-Indigenous organization provide an Indigenous organization as much as we can provide you with, right? So, and I think that's a really big one for me is reciprocity, because we do give a lot, we do sit in a lot of spaces, and we do help non-Indigenous organizations understand the environment that we're working in. And I guess the reciprocity there is that more non-Indigenous organizations have a better understanding of the issues, but I mean, that shouldn't necessarily fall on the backs of Indigenous organizations. And so really to think about this concept of reciprocity and how you can enact it in your own relationships. We'll move to the last slide. So I'll kind of end it with this, that if you are seeking to build a relationship with an Indigenous community organization, I don't think that there is an excuse not to if you're working in any of these places where there's a red bubble. So friendship centers or a blue bubble or a green bubble. So friendship centers, like I had mentioned earlier, are in just about every large city, medium-sized city, rural town that has a significant Indigenous population. They're oftentimes the main point of contact for urban Indigenous people. I mean, again, I can testify to that. Living in Ottawa for most of my life, the Friendship Center was the main hub that I went to not just access programs and services, but hang out with friends. It was it's a community space. And so if you're looking to build a meaningful relationship with Indigenous communities within the spaces that you work in, Friendship Centers are a good outlet to do that. But just make sure that, the things we talked about prior to this are taken into consideration before you begin that work. But yeah, this is a map. If you want to learn more about Friendship Centers, where we're located, the work that we're doing, nefc.ca. You can kind of take a look at, we have a new revamped website. We've gone through a whole new rebranding. So I recommend taking a look at it. You can see where all the different Friendship Centers are located, what they do. There's also like contact information there as well. So yeah, I think that's my last slide. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it is. So thank you, Miigwech. Yeah, I can be reached at shafez@nefc.ca. If you have any questions or want to have a conversation ever, feel free to email me. There's 158 people here, so if I get emails from 158 people, I probably won't respond right away. So, but yeah, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the next part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Shady. That's a lot for us to reflect on, and we really, really appreciate your honesty. I'm looking forward to the next part of the conversation, and it's over to you. I just wanted to pop in and thank you for that, and invite all of our guests to turn on the cameras.
Okay, so right, I'll be doing the, I forgot I'm doing this part too. Okay, so I'm just opening up some documents on my end here just to make sure that I have everything I need to facilitate this conversation. So, sorry, I'm just going to take a quick little breath here because I just talked a lot. So the next part of today is going to be a panel presentation. And we have two organizations present. Sorry, I'm just opening up some things here. Just one moment. Sorry. So we have Sage Paul from the Indigenous Fashion Arts, which is the organization responsible for the organization of Indigenous Fashion Week in Toronto, which is a gathering that engages over 100 Indigenous artists and craftspeople from across the country to celebrate Indigenous expression, art, and knowledge. We also present is Candace Cockney from the Tuktoyaktuk Community Corporation, which is a community of just under 1,000 people located on the shores of the Arctic Ocean on the tip of the Northwest Territories. Candace is accompanied by John Thomas Nuksana, who is the Junior Manager Technician for the Maker Space, Nellie Cornea, who is the Vice Chair of the Tuktoyaktuk Community Corporation, and Betty Elias, who is a local artist who will share their experiences with the creation of the local makerspace. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to pose one question to everybody, and we will go from there. Oh, no, sorry. We will also allow folks to introduce themselves. Apologies. So maybe Sage, if you want to provide yourself with an introduction, and then we'll go over to everyone else. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sage Paul. I am the Executive and Artistic Director at Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto. We actually just incorporated as a nonprofit this past November as Indigenous Fashion Arts. We've been operating as an artist collective, and I just think that's an example of how our communities are mobilizing ourselves, is by bringing groups together to create really important platforms like Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto. We're a biennial festival. The next one will be in June 9th to 12th. Like you guys heard, we present 100 artists a year. It ranges from year to year. We also do annual programming throughout the year, which is actually through building relationships with various arts and fashion companies and organizations. And so relationship building is a hugely important part of the work that we do, specifically because we work with many individuals and entrepreneurs who really do not have the capacity to be engaging in conversations that are very new and are very much based in Western capitalism. So Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto is super important for many various reasons, but I'm really excited to speak about you know, the project, the work that we're going to be doing through the funds that we were granted, and I'm excited to hear about from Candace. Thanks.
Thank you, Sage. So yeah, we'll move to the Tuktoyaktuk Corporation. Maybe if everybody wants to give themselves a quick introduction on your end, because I know there's a few people in the room there, and then we'll go into the first round of questions.
Just to introduce Betty Elias here. She came in, very busy woman and involved. So Betty has been involved with the makerspace at the beginning on the application that was put through the Arctic Inspiration Prize, and as a result, the makerspace in Inuvik and onto John was created. In our region, we have many artists, many artists, because we're sort of a community that's far outside of Canada. And I just say Canada because it seems that way sometimes. But I just want to say thank you for Shady, because that was what I saw and eyeing with Candace, is that with what the presentation did, it's a very common thread. Although we're not a city but one of the things to remember is we represented by our land claim that was settled in 1984. And the regional organization is very proactive in supporting us. But there are things that we do for our community that we're tied to very strongly, but we also participate. And I like the presentation because everyone has testified to the point that we get drawn on a lot to feed into our relationship with others. So a lot of our clients in our fashion industry, where we have some people that live in the South and are involved, is that when we're trying to do something, it's drying out, and the reciprocity thing is not really always there. But Candace can talk about a little bit about one or two of the projects that we're doing, and her job is really to try to work with the community and draw in whoever can have that support. Our clients are normally all non-Aboriginal people who buy their arts and crafts, and they're all non-Aboriginal. And we've just lately gone through a very large relationship with the oil and gas industry, which is sort of caved in, as everybody knows. So, but the arts and the artistry of the community is there. And people participate, and they go to a lot of meetings, like you say. But what is the outcome? Where do we go from here? So I guess we have a bit of a limited time, and we'll give. Do you want to do yours? Just sort of a little bit of a presentation, and then introduce that John and Betty do
the. I'm Candace Coffey. I'm the project manager for the Tuktoyaktuk Community Corp. Raised here.
Please get closer to the microphone. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank first of all, thank the Healthy Communities Initiatives for funding the Tuktoyaktuk makerspace that we have running currently. It's been great. It's keeping the community active. And like Nellie mentioned, that we do work with a lot of non-Aboriginal organizations. And I also just wanted to thank Shady, because your presentation was spot on with every point that you pointed out there. Yeah, we're very, very busy. My main focus is to build capacity in the community with our Aboriginal people. And this is one right now. This is John Thomas. He's the junior manager technician for the makerspace. And I could just let him do a quick introduction.
Good morning. My name is John Oksana. I was born and raised in Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories. Very small community. Just getting all my experience here. Quite young. I just graduated high school. Recently, learning as I go, basically. But it's been great so far, being in the position that I'm in, learning and meeting all the people that I have. Well, I guess that would be it.
Okay, and Betty was, like I say, one of the people that were initially as a signature to the Arctic Inspiration, which funded the makerspace, beginning of makerspace in Inuvik. And so she was one of the graduates who are going like, this year's our $500,000. So, but Betty is very active in arts and supports the community's traditional skills, which are called upon often.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Betty, you might want to say a few words on.
Yeah, I'm going to say Koyanaini, which means thank you. I have been with the Makerspace program for maybe 4 or 5 years, and when it started up in Inuvik, and so I had to leave the community to relocate to learn how to use all this technology, and it was so like challenging for me because I'm just so used to doing things differently, especially with crafts. But I like to incorporate my works with stuff from produced at the makerspace using like the Illustrator and the laser, and then incorporate my culture into it with using like furs and hides, and also and I give you an example of what I make here. Like these are keychains, and I use moose hide and here, I'll just show you. Yeah, and here's another one. So there are some of the materials that
This is a little easier to see for them.
yeah. Some of the materials that I find at the makerspace, and then I just use some of the materials from home, like the furs that we get in our community, in our land. And I get a lot of good response from visitors. I still get orders to do with these, and they make great souvenirs. So it's just like promoting tourism and stuff like that. So I'm really glad we have it here, and I have a good instructor.
Just to add on to what Betty said, since I got in, Betty's been great. Betty's really awesome to work with. She's, okay, no complaints here. She's good to work with all around, but that's how it is around here. We touch base and they come in. We got the laser, we got the sublimation machine, we got the 3D printer. So we have these tools here, and people can come in, they can work with them. And not only that, but they can incorporate that in, like, say, tourism or whatever that might be. You might make something for your family or, But the point is, you can use these machines and this technology in this center for the community. And it has, has the sky's the limit when you're in there, right? If you've seen the things that people have made in there and the things that people are capable of with those machines, it's actually quite impressive, and I just feel like people like Betty really do benefit off of the makerspace, especially.
And one other thing too, I'm really glad that I can start incorporating or promoting my language through this program as well. So Inuvialuktun is our language, and I'm we're working in different ways to try to promote it and to to strengthen it again. So I use Makerspace.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. That's it sounds like a really great space, and it sounds like really great work is happening there. Really, really cool. So I will jump into a question here for everyone. So the first question is, and we'll talk about building relationships with other organizations or other communities or institutions. So what do you value when you are building a new relationship with another organization or institution? And maybe we'll jump over Sage if you want to speak to that, and then we'll come back to Makerspace.
Totally. I think you've already mentioned it, but the reciprocity is it's such a huge one for us. And I find that we often become facilitators in those conversations between organizations and artists, and trying to create that platform that allows for that communication, because often many organizations don't actually come at a partnership in that way. It's very contractual, where it's like, I want this for this amount of money. So there's not a sense of shared value for what is being for what the exchange is between ourselves and the organization and the designers that we work with, especially when things are not always monetary for us. There's a lot of, making sure that our communities are able to live, and that sometimes things are because of family. If we're sharing work through family, especially if it's ceremonial types of works, those are just things that we can't partner on, and we need to be able to communicate that and with the people that we partner with, and for them to accept that. So reciprocity is very important. Another thing too is, especially now that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think belonging has been added on to that now. I like you were saying, is that often we come into spaces and we're only there just to sit there, or we have a number of organizations that are coming to us and they want us to do a special project with and for them. And we just don't have the capacity. We have 2 full-time staff. During the festival, we contract about 20 individuals to run the festival, but we're very, very small, and we don't have the capacity to be running that kind of those kinds of projects. So what I really hope to help encourage is kind of a release of the power of wanting to own one project that we do with an organization, and rather come be a part of the events that we're already doing. It's what we're doing is Indigenous-led. It's for and by our community. We work with many different Indigenous people from across the country, and we do have a lot to offer. And I think just letting go of the power and the control that I often see, especially in the fashion industry and in corporate organizations, is allowing us to be a part, to help lead what those projects are. So I think leadership is super important. And just in general within our community, because it is by and for Indigenous people, I think generosity is a hugely important when we all come from so many backgrounds and we all have so many different resources and different experiences. I grew up in the city. I grew up in downtown Toronto, whereas my family grew up on the reserve. And the funniest thing that happened, my cousin was just visiting recently, and we were just joking that he didn't know about tipping in Toronto, and so we're just kind of joking around. But then he laughed at me because I didn't know, when I first saw the Northern Lights, I was freaking out. Like, it was like, whoa. But they're just like, what? We see it every day. Like, so it's just such a minor thing of looking at how different our experiences are. But, they are so different. So I think it's really important to be generous and loving in the way that family is when we're working between our communities, and then help to facilitate reciprocal relationships that are Indigenous-led with non-Indigenous groups.
Thank you so much, Sage. That was great. Really, really great. And yeah, I agree with everything you just said. Yeah, we experience a lot of the same things on our end too. Candice, did you want to speak to the question as well?
I think, as we're looking at it, we're sort of commenting on the presentations that are coming in. And certainly, the common thread that's through it, we're more a rural community, I think, and we're out of we have 7 Indigenous organizations in the Northwest Territories, and we're on the far end of it. And oftentimes it's how hard you work at it. And our issue is it's really down to the same thing that has been said. We don't have to recreate, but we have to support. And it would be, if we're talking about non-Indigenous groups, it's to have them take the time to understand where the Indigenous communities are coming from, and the different priorities you set when you're doing something. And you don't have to be a magnificent, take a hold of everything organization. There's people who have the skills, but the pressure we get is it's the other way around. We're trying to meet their needs, and we're often put into a situation where we fit into what someone has decided in terms of policy and government support. We're trying to fit into that to get what we want in the end, or what we need. And that becomes a problem because we spend a lot of time on trying to figure out what's the right words for that right application to do what we want to do. And I think when in dealing with non-Aboriginal people, which I've done a lot in my time, is to get them to understand that thank you, but please understand that we don't have that long line of support that goes right up to senior government. We're part of that smaller smaller scope, but we're going to contribute. We will contribute. And I think to understand, people are born here, they live here, and they'll probably die here. And our children is what we can do for our children. And right now, as everyone knows, the more we can do, even how small it is in supporting individuals and community, matter a lot. And oftentimes non-Aboriginal people play a big role in that. And how do they fit in? I think they have to think of the bigger picture too, when they're promoting the policies and initiatives, and how they're going to support. Find that out, how they can do it. We often tell, like I think you had dwelt on it a bit, where we give, so someone can do our research. We're research to death, and sometimes we have to fight, say, what did you find out with that research? And we participate. So it's maybe in non-Aboriginal institutions in Canada, where, they get to know us so that we can, that it fits into what would be really appropriate for us. Like number one thing, as an example, housing. We have programs, and it's great to have John, because we have a space for a makerspace. But normally we have opportunity to develop our arts and crafts, but people do it in their homes, and then I got 10 people in their homes. Where do they put that? You say education. You have all these people in your house. Where do they study? So there's a lot of needs, and everybody knows what they are because it's been promoted. And so I think with non-Aboriginal people, we don't like the word patronizing, but sometimes that comes into play a lot. But people are willing to do something, and you have to support them, like an institution who wants to do and deliver support and tools to their community, so individually and community can do a better job of what they know already.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing all of that. That's really, really insightful and important things to consider. We'll jump over to the next question. So the question is, can you share a concrete experience you have worked on building trust among Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations? So really, I guess the spirit of the question is, can you share an experience of a positive relationship or experience you've had building a relationship with a non-Indigenous organization? Maybe Sage, you want to answer this one?
Yeah, totally. We work with a number of partners, and I think the most important thing is to allow time for a relationship to grow, to try things, and see where where it doesn't work, and see where it does work, and then try again. There's because we work in different ways, and that's one thing I talk about when we go into a new relationship, is that we don't operate in the same way as those organizations do. There is, well, actually, we started working with Simon's, which is a department store. They have 7 locations across the country. They're a basic department store like HBC. And I actually started working with them because I was speaking with the woman's buyer in a panel discussion, and we had many of the same values. You know, we wanted to see less waste, and we wanted to support our local communities, and we just wanted to see, you know, greater things happen here. And when I spoke with them, I knew how fashion works usually is that people manufacture a huge amount of products, and then they deliver it, and then the designer doesn't get paid until everything's sold, and then things get sent back. So it's very wasteful, and it puts people have to put in a lot of money to be a part of that. So I let them know that the designers that we work with, we cannot operate like that. Each piece is one of a kind. We don't mass produce. Often we're working with, you know, hides and furs that have been hunted and tanned locally. The beadwork is made by, you know, from our grandma's grandma, great, great, great grandma, from quill work. And so there's all of this work that is just not the same as fast fashion. So I really had to mention how important it was that one, the designers got paid up front, and that they wouldn't have to return any of the money. That there was a lower quantity, and also that the designers are living in rural and remote areas. So shipping has to be another thing. It's like making sure that, because they want to do shipping right from their stores. So make sure that they account for that it's going to cost money to ship to and from each of the designers that we were working with. And they were very forthcoming. It was a nice surprise. And I will say that I have worked with other retailers who are not as flexible, because you know they also have to get their profits. So with Simon's, they were very open to allowing that kind of payment structure, that infrastructure of how they usually run a business, to change and to work for Indigenous artists and designers working in fashion and craft. We were also very strong about controlling our narrative and the narrative of the individuals we were working with. We didn't want to have anything wrong. And there was an incident where one of the models that they chose, they actually didn't get our approval, and she was very, I don't want to say this in any other way, but she was a very skinny, white passing person which is not hugely representative of many of the Indigenous people in Canada. And so that was something that we had to flag, and they were very apologetic, and that's still something we're trying to get through. The end of the day, it wasn't the biggest issue that we could have faced, because we were still controlling the narrative that we wanted to share with our audiences. Because another thing that was actually, I found, was more important to catch was in a press release, they had talked about, they're like, this is a project to preserve Indigenous culture. And I found that very problematic, because when you talk about preservation, you're preserving something that's no longer alive. And we're all totally alive, and our families are, our traditions are, where we come from are alive. So it's like, we want to sustain our cultures and maintain that, and that what has been passed down. And they were open to that. And they continue to work with us. And so this is the other important part, is that they are excited to work with us. I mean, the project was very successful in that, like, we launched it just as COVID had started. So they were very concerned about their sales, because that's, you know, they're a for-profit business, and it was actually very successful, and they want to continue ensuring that there's Indigenous representation there. And I think they also see that there's a value for them in there also. So they're actually we're putting together more of a database that is like kind of a showroom that they can help expand Indigenous representation at their store, just beyond Indigenous, but beyond women's wear. And there was actually an Inuit brand called Hinani, they're going to be doing some prints for some of their shirts. And one of the prints is a polar bear that is like, I guess there's birds that go down and attack the bears or something. So like the bear is like out there and there's blood in the bear's mouth. And so I guess they had asked the artist, Nooks Lindell, if they could do it without the blood. But Nooks just responded immediately and said that he wouldn't do it. Like, this is the part of the culture. Like, it's just the way it happens. You know, blood is there. And after that explanation, they were like, "Okay, we get it, and we'll keep it in that way," which I think just gives a much more rich. There's a richness to the work that's being shared, and so not only are audiences and consumers learning and supporting Indigenous economies and Indigenous artists, but also the organization itself is really understanding in more like organic ways how to work with us and areas that they can't push back on just simply because that's how they've always done it. They're open to change, and I've really appreciated that. And so we continue to work together.
Thank you, Sage. That was really, really interesting stuff that I've never worked in the fashion industry, so it's cool to learn and listen about that. So thank you. Candice, do you want to share a little bit maybe as well about positive experiences you've had building relationships with non-Indigenous organizations?
So, as you know, the Tuck Community Corp is a non-profit organization, and our means is to take care of our invalid beneficiaries. So we do work with a lot of Indigenous organizations here in Tuck. I'm going to talk about the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous. So we have like the Young Woman Shelter that GCC deals with, the Youth Center, so a lot of Indigenous organizations. With the non-Indigenous organizations, we worked with a lot. So we have a couple partnerships right now with some non-Indigenous organizations, and I can so like one example here is like the Hamlet of Tuck.
That we're doing a partnership.
So one of our projects is a beautification project that we have here with the Tuck Community Corp, and it's to beautify the community. So we had a partnership with a shipping painting company in Ontario, where they gave the community free recycled paint to do this project. But all I can say is from my experience just with non-Aboriginal organizations, is I've never had, I don't think, a bad experience. And like one way is like to understand like our people and our culture, to it's just.
Oh, I think a lot of the projects that we do here from a community level, we generally instigate, or we had a strategic plan about 5 years or 6 years ago. Now, what does a community want to do? What's important? And we've had the oil and gas industry for many years, and a lot of stuff left behind, a lot of crap and stuff in the community didn't look very good. And most of the housing is public housing, social housing. And they just they never have enough money to make them look good. So one of the things is that just happened, and Candice was involved with that, is there's a recycling company. One of the people happened to be up here, built a relationship, and we were sitting in a meeting, and we said, well, how do we clean up the town? How do we make it look nice? How do we make people be proud of their community? Because people are really bad, in a way where, they see something, well, I'll keep that, and then maybe I'll use it for something later. maybe something that could help fix a skidoo or a boat, and they got all this stuff piled up and they're saving it. So just try to clean it up, and happened to be we were at a meeting, and it just happened that one of the people that we're working with, he said, well, and we talked about painting, the houses and getting people to paint their houses. And it just happened, this person was on a program that's very popular. What do they call it? Anyway, one of the programs on CBC, The Dragon's Den. And he made his presentation that he's getting in business to recycle paint. And the government has a program to help them do that, because they would want to actually limit the debris in the big urban center garbage dumps. They didn't want to put that anymore. So guy just happened to be, and we were sitting in a meeting, and one of the guys were with us. He says, well, just call this guy right now. So I called this guy, and he says, would you be interested in supplying paint? So we invited him up, and he's been supplying paint and making sure we get it, but we have to pay for the transportation to get it here. And Candace runs a project, and every year we do about 7 to 10 houses every year.
So I would just add on to that I know, like, a lot of these Indigenous organizations, they like call and want to work with us. We're an Aboriginal organization. But what I see most of them do is they come and meet the people, right? Come and meet like our board, and then we start connecting, like a really good connection, and that comes into play where not like they're not taking all information, right? We're gonna all share it together. We're gonna so I've had that experience of, I think that's just where I like to see it, is where they come and want to see you and join in with the community, with the culture, and how we look at things in a different perspective than them, and they start looking at the same perspective as us.
Thank
The
you.
house look really nice now. It's much better with the different colors, and it just gives it an uplift in the eye.
And then we access some funds too. So we have, about 10 people every summer working and painting, and there are people who are doing that. And they're doing a very good job, and it's now become an expectation every year. Okay, when do we start our painting project? And so it's a complete involvement of our local membership, and hopefully they'll grow beyond that too. Same with John's, what he's doing, and Betty is also, just to reflect on our culture and traditions. Betty is a teacher. She's a newly out speaking teacher, and she's taught in schools, and she's a absolutely wonderful traditional drum dance singer, and starting to work with kids again, but we've got a very aggressive group in that area. She's also in fashions, and she's a wonderful seamstress and sewer. And we have a large community that does that. So, she's not, and she just got a new car after we finished fixing up her car the other day, because the back window broke down, and I was the only one in town that duct tape and cardboard we fixed it. Now she's got a new vehicle. So she's very, she really reflects the the philosophy behind how people like to do things and how they'll get involved. And one of the things I just want to mention, and I think it's a bigger issue, we have a lot of art. The lady was talking about the polar bear with the blood on it, and I know all about that one, but it's plagiarism. We do something and we put it in place, and then all of a sudden everybody wants to copy it. And it takes away, and it's good. I said in a way it's good, because people are getting ideas. But what happens is it takes away from what we want to develop, because it's taken away and made into something a little different. But in the end, it takes away the clientele who you would be selling. So I think if we're dealing with non-Aboriginal groups, a big thing for them to think about, is this essentially coming from an Indigenous practitioner, you know? Is it coming from them? Or is it somebody copying and not really being, you know, just taking the art and they have a good home, they sit home and they get all types of help and they include themselves in the marketplace. So that's the plagiarism. I know it's a big question, but we've faced that for many years.
Thank
And
you,
how do you
Candice.
protect how do you protect and build on the people who are really contributing to the traditional art of Canada?
Thank you, Candice, for sharing. Yeah, that's an important note to end on there. I mean, we've even had to deal with it at the Friendship Center level, where we have community, well, they're not community organizations, things popping up in cities calling themselves friendship centers that are not composed of Indigenous people, and they're trying to access funds and access spaces reserved, you know, for us and buy-in for us. And so we've had to. I think these issues are happening in so many different areas and sectors, and so it's definitely a topic that's important to a lot of us right now. Thank you so much for sharing. I just muted myself, sorry. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing, and Sage as well for sharing your perspectives. I think we'll leave the last few minutes here for questions from folks in the audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and I can throw the questions out there and see if we have some responses. So yeah, we'll give it maybe a minute or two for people to type out any questions that they may have. And if we don't get any questions, then I think we'll kind of leave it there and close things up. But we'll give folks a minute or two just to see if any questions come through.
I'll jump in and say hello to you while we're waiting to see if there's any questions. That was such a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for opening this discussion with us, Shady, and all of our guests. I'm just checking with you. Oh, there you go. You have a question there. What is your advice for trying to get Indigenous youth involved in events? And what events might they be interested in? That's from Melissa.
I giggled a bit because I was like, I've been trying to answer myself this question for a long time too. But
is Melissa coming from an Indigenous or non-Indigenous organization?
I wonder if Melissa can answer that question in the chat. Non-Indigenous.
Non-Indigenous.
Yeah. My immediate reaction is you really have to become a part of the community that you want to engage, because what events might they be interested in? Well, youth are interested in all sorts of things, and so I think it's important to actually do that work, like the group from NWT with Candice. They were just, what were they just saying? Sorry, I totally just lost my train of thought. Oh, they were saying that people come and visit. They meet the board of directors. That's how to get Indigenous youth involved, is be engaged in our community and be an active member in our community.
I agree with you. I agree with going out and talking to these youth, you know, seeing what are they interested in, because that's what we do around here. Like, you know, we have a youth center and we have kids come here every day, and they're like, oh, well, you know, we should paint one night. Okay, let's paint then, you know. And so it's just going out and associating with all the youth and asking them what they want to do, like what interests them.
And I think like people like Betty and John, you know, either providing an opening when youth want to do something, like, for example, what and we have in the school the Jordan principal employees. We've got 7 of them, and they're all from Tuktoyaktuk, and they do an excellent job because their job is to work with the youth, and they're doing the traditional link between education and traditional education and knowledge based, and the youth. Sometimes I think it's to put something on the table, invite everybody, and see how they respond.
And
I know we got a small enough community to do that.
Yeah, and I agree with Nelly's. One example is like what John's doing right now at the makerspace is he brought it to the youth center, and like there was a lot of kids interested, right, John?
Yeah, yeah. I think most of it's just catching kids, you know, just keeping them in like keeping their minds active, you know, and keeping them involved. A lot of that stuff is really important. You know, if they're not involved, if you're not communicating with them clearly, you know, if you're not making it an open conduit for both of you to really, you know, get on that level, then I don't, you know, that's how you get people involved, right? That's how you get people to get interested, is you open a conduit so both of you can work together. You don't, you know, it's that way you feel like they feel like they're working with you rather than just, you know, you working with them.
Thanks.
You know?
Thanks for sharing, everyone. Yeah, I agree with all the points mentioned. Yeah, I think it's also important to remember that, like, not just Indigenous youth, the youth in general are hard to engage with. Not engage with, but bring out to events. At the Friendship Center level, and having worked in community for a long time, that's probably the hardest segment of any community to get excited about a lot of things. And so like Sage said, like, they're youth, and youth are going to be into what youth are into, right? And so it's to kind of focus in on those things, and but also kind of a lot of times, when I worked at the Friendship Center and youth programming and stuff, it was if you get 3 people out there, count your blessings, and do the work with those 3 people, and try and make it work with those 3. And if you get 20 out, that's cool too. But it's really just about doing the work with what you have. There's one last question that popped up here, and we'll throw it out, and then we'll close everything. So the question was, what is the most important thing to keep in mind while interacting with Indigenous people or community? So yeah, I can throw it out there, but I'll also just summarize too that it's important to remember that we're definitely not a monolith, and so all of our communities are diverse, and we have different experiences and perspectives. And I think working with a community in one place and working with a community in another place is going to be very different things to keep in mind and different things to consider. But yeah, it's building that understanding of who's the community you want to work with, and what's the issues that are important to that community, and then I think you might be able to answer that question. But I'll pop it over to maybe Sage or Candace if you want to answer that as well.
I think about this all the time because people ask it all the time, and actually my husband just launched a show. He's a writer, and he references all my relations, which is something that we say after various ceremony, or we're doing talk, which acknowledges that we're all related. And I think that's so important to remember, like, not when you're just interacting with our communities, but with any communities, that that we're all related. And when you're walking into someone's community, you're walking into their home, and to treat their space as a guest. Because often I find people want to work with me in a way that they feel entitled, that that I should want to work with them. And also, like, there's often a lot of martyrdom, like they're going to bring in something and save us. When our communities operate in different ways, there's a lot of talk around Indigenous governance, and I think this is just governance in which we've been raised in to operate, and so we operate differently. So there's going to be that learning curve of building that relationship. Okay, how do we do things? How do those two ways of doing things come together? So I just think it's important to, just go in respectful and treat it like you're in somebody else's house. And I feel like that's the easiest way to approach it.
I agree with Sage about respect. Also kindness. So if you come to Tuck and you're walking down the road, or someone will invite you in for tea or for supper, or so I agree with respect and kindness. That's it.
Well, there's two things. Is that do we talk about capacity, and our communities are intertwined in terms of, what different, like we have a Hamlet Council, which is basically a expanded public works. We have the community corpus, really more traditional, and looks to that, but we work closely together. But I don't know, like, for example, if we know that a lot of our young people have never been out of Tuck. We want them to go out, we want them to do a bit of traveling and seeing different places, and they're interested in that. And they help raise money for it, but travel to different places is awfully expensive. So it would be really good to see whether there's a long list of 138 people that's willing to contribute to youth travel.
Wow.
Simple as
That
that.
would be awesome.
Thank you, Candice. Yeah, appreciate that. So I think with that being said, and answering those questions and all the conversations we had, I think our time is coming to a close here. So I just want to say a big miigwech to everybody who was here and attended and participated and listened, but most importantly to Sage and everyone from the Tuktoyaktuk Corporation and the Makerspace who came and shared with us your experiences and your thoughts and your insights into everything. I know I learned a lot today, and I hope everyone else did. And I hope that for all the participants, we were able to help inform some better approaches and better practices going into the future when it comes to how you build relationships with our organizations. And so that's it on my end. I don't know if Gabe or Gabriella, if you have any, Gay, sorry, and Gabriella. I put both your names together. I'm sorry. And if you have anything left to say, but that's it for me. So yeah, miigwech.
I would maybe just say a big thank you. I think this end on the reflection around respect and kindness, definitely, like, it's a very good way to conclude today. So thank you very much to every one of you who has participated, especially to the speakers, and Shady, to yourself too. It's been really, really nice to be able to host this conversation. I think there's just a few remarks that we want to do. We understand that this is a very complex and it's a conversation that, as you have mentioned, requires longer time and an investment. And we understand that this is just a starting point, and we want to make sure that we mention this. As a follow-up, we may open the opportunity for those of you in the audience who would be interested maybe in joining in small group discussions to continue this conversation in a smaller setup and to explore some of the questions, some of the experiences that you may have. So that's an important thing. This is a starting point, and we want to make sure that we continue on this path. Our colleague Rupal has just shared on the chat, I think, the link to the survey. We are going to send a feedback survey. If you can provide us, we promise it's less than 3 minutes, and it gives us so much information about how to kind of like frame these sessions and improve them. So if you could respond to them, that would be amazing. And also to let everyone know that we are going to be sharing these surveys plus the recording of the session, and also the links that have been shared via the chat during the discussion with everyone who registered for the session. So you can expect that to arrive sooner rather than later into your inbox. And I think the last thing to say is thank you. Gay, I don't know if you have any other words you would like to add. And otherwise, I guess we hope that you all have a lovely end of the day. And we hope to see you soon. These community mobilization sessions. Candice, please.
Just to say, we don't say goodbye or anything else like that. Our word is ilanilo. And it means,
Ilanilo.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it
then
means
So long or until next time.
until next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no goodbye in our society.
Yeah. It's been great meeting you all. Yeah, really.
Hoy na nakpalo.
Not too bad for my first ever conversation on Zoom, eh? Like first ever sort of like meeting type of esque thing I've ever done, you know? So get those jitters out of the way, you know what I mean? Yeah.
This is fantastic. This is I think the best ending we could have, this celebration and this laughter together. So I think we will leave it there, and thank you, and see you all soon.
See ya.
I
Ilanilo.
Asi, thank you.